the security footage was grainy. The timestamp read 2:47 a.m., and Arthur Sterling hadn't moved from his leather chair in 4 hours. His tie was loosened. His glass of scotch sat full and untouched beside his keyboard. He had rewound the same 43 seconds of footage 17 times, and every single time he watched it, his chest tightened like someone was slowly turning a wrench between his ribs. On the screen, a woman knelt on the basement floor. She had placed a cello between her knees and was playing not for the room, not for any audience, but for a 7-year-old girl who sat barefoot on the cold tiles, eyes closed, palms pressed flat against the floor. The girl was his daughter, and the girl was smiling. Arthur hadn't seen Lily smile in 8 months. His hand shook as he reached for the mouse. He paused the footage. He stared at Lily's face, that open, unself-conscious, purely joyful smile, and something cracked open in his chest that he didn't have a name for yet. "What did you do to my daughter?" he whispered to the frozen screen. He didn't know it yet, but the answer to that question was going to change everything. 3 months earlier, Arthur Sterling was not a man who tolerated inefficiency. He had built Sterling Technologies from a rented server room and a credit card into a company worth $11 billion. He woke at 5 every morning. He read 3 newspapers before 6. He had never once been late to a meeting, and he had fired 2 vice presidents for being late to his. The world moved at his pace, or it didn't move at all. His daughter was the one problem in his life that money could not solve at his pace. Lily Sterling was 7 years old. She had been born profoundly deaf in both ears with bilateral sensorineural hearing loss, the kind that cochlear implants could help only marginally. She was small for her age, with her mother's dark eyes and Arthur's stubborn jaw, and she communicated mostly through gesture, expression, and the occasional hurled object when her frustration peaked. Arthur had hired the best pediatric audiologist in the country, Dr. Raymond Thorne, at a retainer of $40,000 a month. He had also hired and subsequently lost 5 different nannies in 18 months. The 5th one, a perfectly qualified woman named Mrs. Hadley, had quit on a Tuesday morning after Lily threw a glass vase at the wall and then sat in the wreckage and screamed, not a sound anyone could hear, but a vibration Arthur felt through the soles of his shoes when he walked past the room. He hadn't gone in. That memory sat in him like a stone. His assistant, Gerald, had placed 6 new candidate files on his desk by Thursday. Arthur flipped through them the way he reviewed quarterly reports quickly, looking for red flags, discarding anything that didn't meet the threshold. Too young, overqualified on paper, but the references were weak. One woman listed conflict resolution as a skill, which told Arthur she expected conflict. He set her aside. He paused on the 6th file, Elena Vasquez, 41 years old. Degree in music education from the Royal Conservatory. Former orchestral conductor. Former, not current. The employment gap was enormous. 4 years of nothing, then a string of domestic work placements. Nanny, housekeeper, caregiver. The file read like a career in free fall. Her references from the domestic placements were excellent. Her shoes, Arthur noticed when she arrived for the interview, were clean but worn through at the left heel. She sat across from him without fidgeting. That was the first thing he noticed. Most people fidgeted in his office. The glass walls, the view 40 floors above the city, the deliberate minimalism of the furniture. It was all designed, consciously or not, to make people feel small. Elena Vasquez sat the way someone sits when they have already survived the worst thing that will ever happen to them and have nothing left to prove. "Your background is in music," Arthur said. "It wasn't a question." "It was," she said. "The change?" She looked at him steadily. "Changed first, I followed." He waited for more. She didn't offer it. He found unexpectedly that he respected that. "My daughter is 7. She is profoundly deaf. She has significant behavioral challenges. She has driven away 5 caregivers in 18 months. He watched Alina's face for a flinch. There wasn't one. "The last woman who held this position quit after Lily threw a vase." "Anyone hurt?" Alina asked. Arthur blinked. "No." "Then Lily was communicating," Alina said simply. "Not misbehaving. Communicating, there's a difference." Silence in the office lasted almost 10 seconds. "Hired," Arthur said. "You start Monday." If you're already feeling something watching this story unfold, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps more people find this video. Now let's get back to Lily and Alina. Alina's first week was quiet. She learned the house, the sprawling, immaculate mansion that smelled of fresh flowers replaced daily by a service, and contained almost no warmth whatsoever. She learned Lily's schedule, which Dr. Thorne had constructed with the rigidity of a military operation: speech therapy at 9, lip-reading exercises at 11, rest period sensory suppression exercises at 3. Alina sat in on one of Dr. Thorne's sessions on Wednesday and did not say a single word the entire time. She didn't need to. She watched Lily sit across from the doctor at a small table, forced to hold eye contact and attempt to reproduce the shapes his mouth made. She watched Lily's hands grip the edge of the table. She watched the way the child's shoulders crept up toward her ears, not in excitement, but in the specific, recognizable posture of a person bracing for impact. When Lily got a sound wrong, Thorne would shake his head slowly and point at his lips again. When she got it right or close enough, his expression didn't change. There was no joy in the room. There was no warmth. There was only the relentless mechanical pressure of a man who had decided that a child's silence was a problem to be corrected. By the time the session ended, Lily's hands were trembling. That night, after Arthur had left for a business dinner he would not return from until after midnight, Alina sat on the kitchen floor. She didn't choose the floor for any particular reason. She simply sat down while she was thinking, and the floor was there. She sat with her back against the cabinet and her eyes on the doorway through which Lily had disappeared 2 hours earlier and not reappeared. Alina had a habit of noticing things. She had spent 20 years noticing things. The way a room changed when the oboes were slightly flat. The way an audience exhaled at the exact moment a phrase resolved. The way her son Marcus used to press his ear against the speaker of the radio as a child because he said he liked to feel the music from the inside. Marcus, who had died 4 years ago at the age of 9, of a heart defect no one had caught in time. She closed her eyes. She thought about the way Lily had stared at the kitchen counter that morning when Alina was chopping vegetables. Lily hadn't been watching the knife, hadn't been watching Alina's hands. She had been watching the vibration that traveled through the wood every time the blade came down. Her fingertips had been resting on the edge of the counter, barely touching it, like she was reading something written in a language no one else in the house could see. Alina had noticed that. She filed it away and said nothing. On Friday of the first week, Arthur left for a 3-day merger negotiation in Singapore. He called Gerald from the car to confirm that Dr. Thorne's Saturday session was still scheduled, that the house security system was active, and that Alina had been reminded of the household protocols. He did not call to speak to Lily. Alina stood in the entryway and watched his car pull out of the drive and disappear, and she thought about how a person could love something so completely and be so entirely wrong about how to show it. She went to find Lily. The girl was in her room, sitting in the corner between the bed and the wall, a spot she had apparently claimed as her own, because the carpet there was worn into a small, flat oval. She had a picture book open in her lap, but she wasn't reading it. She was pressing her palm against the wall where, 3 rooms away, the washing machine was running through a spin cycle. Alina could feel it too, faintly, through her own feet. Lily had found it through 30 feet of plaster and wood and insulation. Alina sat down across from her on the floor and waited. After a long moment, Lily looked up. Alina pointed to the wall. She pressed her own palm flat against the carpet. She raised her eyebrows in a question. "Do you feel it?" Lily stared at her. Then, very carefully, she pressed her own palm against the carpet beside Alina's hand. The spin cycle peaked. The vibration moved through the floor in a low, rolling pulse. Lily's eyes went wide. Alina smiled. She held up one finger, "Wait," and she stood up and walked out of the room. She came back with 2 things. A small hand drum she had found in the music room that Arthur had clearly furnished and never used, and a long wooden ruler. She sat back down on the floor. She placed the drum between them. She struck it once sharply with the heel of her hand and watched Lily jump, not in fright, but in startled recognition, the way you jump when someone calls your name in a crowd and you weren't expecting it. Alina placed Lily's hand on the drum skin. She struck it again. She watched Lily's face go very still with concentration, and then, slowly, uncertainly, like someone learning to read a map in a language they'd never studied, Lily struck the drum herself. The sound it made was small and uneven. Lily looked at her hand like it had done something extraordinary. Alina said aloud, even though Lily couldn't hear her. She signed it too, a simple thumbs up, a nod, an expression of undisguised delight. Yes, exactly like that. What followed over the next 2 days was not a lesson in the traditional sense. It was more like two people discovering a country that neither of them had known existed. Alina moved through the house like a cartographer, identifying every surface, every object, every architectural quirk that transmitted vibration. The kitchen counter, the basement stairs, the old upright piano in the sitting room that no one had touched in years. She played the piano with Lily's hands resting on the lid, and she felt the moment Lily connected the movement of Alina's fingers to the pulse beneath her palms. It happened in Lily's face before it happened anywhere else, a sudden lighting up behind the eyes like a match being struck. They developed a vocabulary. Not a formal one. Alina's formal sign language would come later. This was something more instinctive, a tapped pattern that meant pay attention, a pressed palm that meant can you feel this, a specific rhythm on the kitchen counter that became, over time, a kind of greeting. It was imperfect and incomplete and beautiful. On Sunday evening, an hour before Arthur was due back from Singapore, Alina brought the cello from the music room into the basement. She had not planned it exactly. It had happened organically, the way the right notes sometimes arrived before you understood why you were playing them. She positioned Lily barefoot on the cold tile floor. She sat with the cello between her knees and she played. She played slowly at first. A low, sustained note that traveled through the instrument into the floor and up through the soles of Lily's feet. She watched the girl feel it, watched her body make the small, unconscious adjustments that a body makes when it finds rhythm, the way a boat makes small corrections when it finds a current. She played a phrase. She played it again. She changed one note. She played it a third time. Lily moved. It was not dancing, not yet. It was the shift of weight from one foot to the other, a slight lift of the chin, a rolling motion through the hips that had nothing to do with thought and everything to do with the body following something it recognized even if the mind hadn't named it yet. But it was the beginning of dancing. It was the first note of a song Lily had been trying to sing her entire life without knowing the melody. Alina played until her fingers ached, and she did not stop. Neither of them heard Arthur's car arrive early. Now here's where this story takes a turn nobody saw coming. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button right now, because you do not want to miss what happens next. Arthur had caught an earlier flight. The merger had closed faster than projected, or rather, Arthur had closed it faster than projected, because he had not slept in 36 hours and had negotiated with the particular ferocity of a man who wants to go home and does not entirely understand why. He told himself it was efficiency. He told his driver to skip the office. He walked into a house that was dark on the upper floors and quiet everywhere except the basement. He followed the sound. He stood at the top of the basement stairs for almost a full minute before he understood what he was seeing. Alina, playing. Lily, moving. The two of them in a private world of vibration and rhythm and trust, lit by the single overhead bulb that turned everything amber and warm. He watched his daughter's face, that open, unguarded face, and he felt something he could not immediately classify. It sat in his chest between gratitude and grief, and something that might have been shame. He went upstairs without announcing himself. He told himself he needed to process what he'd seen. He told himself he would speak to Alina in the morning. He made himself a drink he didn't finish and sat in his study and opened his laptop and looked at the quarterly projections for 40 minutes without reading a single number. His phone rang. It was Dr. Thorne. "I heard you're back," Thorne said. He had a smooth, unhurried voice, the voice of a man accustomed to being the most authoritative person in any room. "I wanted to touch base before tomorrow's session. Gerald mentioned you have a new caregiver." "Elena Vasquez," Arthur said. "She started last week." "Yes, I'd like to discuss her." A A pause calibrated. I've had some concerns brought to my attention. Arthur sat forward. What kind of concerns? The kind that are difficult to quantify, Thorne said, but that I have seen before in my experience with families in your situation. Well-meaning individuals who become emotionally attached to a child and begin substituting personal instinct for evidence-based methodology. It disrupts the therapeutic framework. It can undo months of careful progress. Alina's been here 1 week, Arthur said. Patterns established quickly with children like Lily. She's impressionable. She's isolated. She will attach herself to anyone who offers her warmth without structure. Another pause. I'm not suggesting Ms. Vasquez has malicious intent. I'm suggesting that what she's doing, whatever it is, may be creating emotional dependencies that interfere with the real work. You hired me because you want results, Arthur. Let me deliver them. Arthur sat in the silence after the call for a long time. He thought about Lily's face in the basement, that unguarded smile. He thought about Dr. Thorne's word, impressionable. He thought about 5 caregivers in 18 months and $40,000 a month and 2 years of speech therapy that had produced, in Lily, nothing but a flinch response every time someone pointed at their own lips. He thought about the security cameras. The house had 8 of them, standard for a property of this value. Arthur had installed them after a break-in scare 3 years ago. He had not thought about them in months. He sat down at his desk and opened the security feed. He found the basement footage from Sunday evening. He pressed play. He watched for 43 seconds and then he stopped breathing. What he saw was not what Thorne had implied. What he saw was not carelessness or manipulation or the blurring of professional boundaries. What he saw was a woman who had pressed her forehead briefly to the top of the cello before she began playing a private gesture, quick and contained, like a prayer, and then played with a focus and a tenderness that Arthur had not seen in a human being's face since his wife had been alive. And he saw Lily. He rewound. He watched again. He paused on Lily's face. He watched it 6 more times. Then he did something that would have been impossible to predict from the outside. Arthur Sterling, who had not cried since his wife's funeral 5 years ago, put his face in his hands and sat very still for 4 minutes in the dark of his study. Then he composed himself, straightened his tie, a reflex, meaningless, the behavior of muscle memory, and he called up the footage from Monday morning. He watched Elena make breakfast. He watched the way she created rhythm in ordinary tasks, a wooden spoon against the pot 3 times instead of 1, a steady tapping while she waited for the kettle, her feet moving in a soft, deliberate pattern on the kitchen tiles. He watched Lily appear in the doorway, drawn by something she couldn't explain. He watched Lily sit at the kitchen counter and press her palms flat against the wood. He watched Alina tap a pattern, pause, and watch Lily's hands. He watched Lily tap back. It looked like a conversation. It looked, in fact, like the most natural conversation he had ever seen Lily have. He should have called Elena in. He should have told her what he was watching, should have said something. Thank you, maybe, or tell me more. Or I didn't know she could do that. Instead, he called Dr. Thorne back. He told himself later that he was asking for a professional perspective, that Thorne had legitimate concerns, that he owed it to Lily to get a second opinion on any unvetted methodology. These were reasonable things to tell himself, and they were not entirely untrue, and they were not the real reason. The real reason was that watching Lily be reached by someone who was not him had opened something in his chest that felt uncomfortably close to failure. And Arthur Sterling's oldest, most deeply practiced response to the feeling of failure was to locate the problem outside himself. Thorne arrived at 7 the next morning. He sat across from Arthur, and he was, as always, composed and credentialed and certain. He used phrases like neurological interference and attachment dysregulation and therapeutic contamination. He placed a folder of literature on Arthur's desk, actual peer-reviewed papers, actual data, and he talked for 20 minutes about the dangers of abandoning structured methodology in favor of what he called emotional improvisation. She was using a cello, Arthur said at one point. Exactly, Thorne said. There is some research on vibrotactile stimulation as a supplementary tool. It's speculative, it's not peer-reviewed at the level we require, and crucially, it should be administered by a trained specialist, not a housekeeper with a music degree. He leaned forward slightly. Arthur, I understand the appeal. I've seen it before. A child who has been unreachable suddenly seems to respond to someone, and the response feels like progress. But feeling like progress and being progress are not the same thing. You could lose everything we've built. Arthur looked at the folder on his desk. He thought about everything you've built and heard without quite meaning to, everything I've built. He thought about $40,000 a month in 18 months and the sessions he had walked past the closed therapy room door to avoid. He walked down the hall to find Alina. She was in the garden with Lily, and when Arthur appeared in the doorway, she knew immediately. He could see her know the way her posture changed, the small, careful reset of her expression. Lily saw Arthur and lifted a hand in a wave. Arthur lifted one back automatically and then turned to Alina. My study, he said. Now. Conversation lasted 9 minutes. Arthur spoke most of it, and he spoke the way he spoke in boardrooms, measured, controlled, the affect of a man who has already made a decision and is now informing others of its consequences. He told Alina that Dr. Thorne had serious concerns. He told her that Lily's treatment plan was not something that could be improvised around. He told her that what he had seen on the footage, he watched her face register the footage, was not something he was prepared to allow to continue unsupervised. Alina said nothing until he finished. Then she said, "What did you see on the footage?" "I saw you conducting sessions with my daughter that fall outside your job description." "I saw your daughter smile for the first time," Alina said quietly. "I thought that was the job description. Your job is to keep her safe and maintain the household routine. It is not to what?" Alina said. "To reach her, to find out what she can do instead of cataloging what she can't." She was not loud. She was not angry exactly. She was the way someone is when they are holding something very important very carefully. Dr. Thorne has been treating Lily for 18 months. When was the last time she smiled in his sessions? Arthur's jaw tightened. Dr. Thorne is a specialist. I know what he is, Alina said, and then she stopped. And in the silence that followed, Arthur became aware that she knew something she had chosen not to say and that her choosing not to say it was its own kind of statement. Effective immediately, Arthur said, you're to limit your contact with Lily to meal preparation and supervision. No music. No, he gestured vaguely. Whatever this is. Looked at him for a long moment. You're going to lose her, she said. Not her hearing, her. You're going to lose the part of her that was just beginning to come back. That's not your concern, Arthur said. She held his gaze for one more second and then she nodded, not agreement but acknowledgement. She left. Arthur stood in his study for a long time after she was gone. He poured the scotch he hadn't finished the night before down the sink and stood at the window and looked at the city, 40 floors below, going about its indifferent morning. 12 days later, Lily stopped eating. It didn't happen suddenly. It happened the way things happen with children, incrementally, quietly, in the gaps between the things adults were paying attention to. She pushed food around her plate. She skipped breakfast. She sat in her corner between the bed and the wall, and she did not respond when Alina, following the restricted protocol Arthur had imposed, knocked and placed a tray just inside the door. The tray sat there until the food was cold. Arthur noticed when the pediatrician called to relay the housekeeper's concern. He went to Lily's room that evening. He sat on the edge of her bed. Lily sat in her corner and looked at him with her mother's dark eyes and did not move. He said, "Lily." He said it aloud, which was absurd, and he knew it was absurd, and he said it again anyway, because he didn't know what else to do. He had bought her a diamond necklace for her birthday that she had not looked at. He had enrolled her in a private school with a specially equipped program that she had attended twice, and then refused to leave the car for. He had paid $40,000 a month for a specialist who had, in 18 months, produced one measurable result. His daughter now flinched every time someone pointed at their own lips. He sat on the edge of her bed in the blue evening light and he looked at the wall across from him, where Lily had pinned a drawing. He hadn't noticed it before. He stood up and walked to it. It was crayon on printer paper, The way Lily's drawings always were rudimentary figures with round heads and stick limbs, but always expressive, always unmistakable. Two figures, one small, one taller. The small one had Lily's dark braids. The taller one had a cello. Between them, Lily had drawn a heart. Under the heart, in the approximated letters of a 7-year-old who was teaching herself to write without being able to hear the sounds the letters made, she had written, Elena. Arthur sat back down on the edge of the bed. He looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he looked at Lily, who had not moved from her corner. He said, very quietly, "I'm sorry." He didn't know if he was saying it to Lily or to the woman in the drawing or to his wife or to some version of himself he was only just starting to see clearly enough to address. Lily looked at him. Then she pressed her palm flat against the wall and waited. He didn't understand. He didn't understand what she was asking him to feel. He didn't understand the language of it, the pressed palm, the waiting, the patient attention to something invisible that Lily had been practicing her whole life, while he had been in conference rooms talking about the future of human communication. He looked at his daughter's hand on the wall. He looked at his own hand, the hand that had signed contracts and shaken other powerful hands, and pointed at spreadsheets and numbers and columns of profit and loss. He had never, in 44 years, pressed his palm flat against a wall to feel what was moving through it. He reached out. But he put his hand on the wall beside hers anyway. The vibration was faint, just the distant hum of the house's heating system, working through pipes and plaster. It was almost nothing. But Lily felt it, and because Lily felt it, Arthur felt it too, and in that small shared moment of sensation, something shifted in him that he would spend the next 6 weeks trying to understand and the rest of his life trying to deserve. Subscribe if you haven't already. This story is almost at its most emotional moment, and you don't want to miss it. He started looking into Alina's past the following morning. Not because he suspected wrongdoing, the footage had settled that. He looked because the woman who had sat across from him in his office and said life changed first had said it with a specific quality of weight that he had filed away without examination. And now, sitting in his study at 4 in the morning with a drawing of a cello and a heart on his desk, he retrieved it. What he found took his breath away. Elena Vasquez had not always been a housekeeper. She had been, until 4 years ago, one of the most respected conductors in the country. She had led the National Chamber Orchestra. She had received 2 international awards for her work with music education programs for children with sensory disabilities, programs she had designed and funded partially herself. She had pioneered a method of tactile music education that used vibration, rhythm, and touch to build musical understanding in children who could not hear in the conventional sense. Her method had a name. It was published. It had been peer-reviewed. It existed in 3 academic journals, and the earliest paper had been co-authored by a colleague whose credentials were, by any measure, more robust than Dr. Raymond Thorne's. Arthur sat very still. He read the papers. Then he read them again. Then he looked up the date of Alina's last public appearance as a conductor and cross-referenced it with the date of her first domestic placement. The gap was 4 months. He found the obituary without looking for it. It was linked in a memorial concert program he stumbled across while searching her name. Marcus Vasquez, 9 years old. Survived by his mother, Elena. Arthur read the words 3 times. Then he read the date. Marcus had died in March. Elena had conducted her final performance in June, 3 months later. She had stood on a stage 3 months after burying her son and led an orchestra through a program that reviewers called transcendent, unaware, as reviewers always are, of what it had cost the person on the podium to simply remain standing. The applause had lasted 6 minutes. Elena had bowed. She had walked off the stage, and she had never walked back onto one. She had spent 4 years since then in other people's houses, caring for other people's children, carrying a methodology that could change lives around in her head like a song she had nowhere left to perform. Until she had walked into Arthur Sterling's office in worn-out shoes and sat down without fidgeting, and waited to see if this man, this particular man, had enough space inside him for a different way of understanding his daughter. He had fired her in 9 minutes. Arthur closed the laptop. He sat in his study in the silence of 4 in the morning. And he thought about what it meant to lose a child and find another one and be told by a man in an expensive suit that you were doing it wrong. He thought about what it meant to be that man in the expensive suit. He made a decision. It was the kind of decision that arrives not as inspiration, but as inevitability. The moment when the only thing left to do becomes obvious because every other option has finally, unmistakably failed. He found Alina at a bus station 11 miles from the house. She was sitting on a bench with a canvas bag at her feet and her coat buttoned to the top, watching the arrivals board with the unhurried patience of someone who has learned to wait. She saw Arthur coming before he reached her. She had that quality, he'd noticed, of always knowing when she was being approached, and she didn't stand up, didn't perform surprise or wariness. She just watched him walk toward her and waited. He sat down on the bench beside her. There was a long silence. The station moved around them, announcements, footsteps, the hydraulic sigh of bus doors opening and closing. "I read your papers," Arthur said. Elena said nothing. "All three of them." He paused. "I also read Marcus's obituary." He heard the small, involuntary intake of breath beside him. He did not look at her. He stared at the arrivals board. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry for what I said in my study. I'm sorry for the way He stopped, started again. "I hired you because you were the only person who didn't flinch when Lily threw a tantrum. I realize now that the reason you didn't flinch is that you'd already survived the worst thing that can happen to a parent. And after that, a 7-year-old throwing a vase is just a 7-year-old throwing a vase." Alina was quiet. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "Why are you here, Mr. Sterling?" "Because my daughter drew a picture of you," he said. "And she hasn't eaten properly in 12 days and she won't let me in and I don't." He stopped. He was a man who did not use the phrase "I don't know how." It was not part of the vocabulary of someone who had built $11 billion from nothing. He used it now. "I don't know how to reach her. I never did. I didn't know that until I saw someone else do it so easily, and instead of asking you to teach me, I called in a man with a folder full of papers to explain why you were doing it wrong." Alina turned to look at him for the first time. "You weren't doing it wrong," he said. "He was wrong. I was wrong. I knew it when I watched the footage. He exhaled. "I'm not good at being wrong." "I know," Alina said, "and there was no cruelty in it. It was just a fact." "She needs you," Arthur said. He looked at her now. "Not as a housekeeper, as whatever you were becoming to her. I don't know the right word for it and I'm not going to pretend I do. I just know that she had something she doesn't have anymore and I was the one who took it away." He paused. "I'm asking you to come back, and I'm telling you that Dr. Thorne is no longer part of Lily's care." Alina looked at the arrivals board. "If I come back," she said slowly, "it's not going to be the way it was. No restrictions. No reporting to Thorne. No hidden cameras used to build a case against work that was helping your daughter." "Agreed. You need to be present," she said. She turned to face him fully now, and her expression was not unkind, but it was absolutely clear. "Not in the building. Present, with her. You have to learn what I'm showing her, Arthur, because I can be the bridge, but you have to be the destination. She needs to know that you want to reach her too, that she's not something to be fixed, that she's someone to be known." Arthur looked at his hands for a moment. "I don't know where to start." "You do," Alina said. "You already started. You came here." Bus station's PA announced an arrival. Around them, people gathered their bags and moved toward the doors. Arthur and Alina sat still in the middle of all that motion, and after a long moment he nodded. "Come back," he said. "Please." She looked at him for a long time. The arrivals board clicked through its destinations, cities, and departure times. A whole world in motion. None of it quite as important as this bench and these two people, and this particular moment in which a man who had built his entire identity on knowing the right answer was asking for help. "My son used to press his ear against the radio," Alina said quietly. "He said he liked to feel the music from the inside." She paused. "When I first saw Lily pressing her hands against the kitchen counter, I saw him. I saw the same hunger in her, the same refusal to accept that the world had nothing for her." Her voice was steady, but barely. "I wasn't trying to replace him. I wasn't trying to make her into him. I was just trying to make sure she knew that what she was reaching for was real, that someone else could feel it too." Arthur looked at his hands. "She knows," he said. "She drew a picture." Alina looked at him. "Of you," he said, And between them, he stopped, composed himself. A heart. The arrival's board changed. She picked up her canvas bag. "I'll need a cello in the basement," she said. "The one in the music room has a crack in the body. Have one delivered tomorrow morning." "Tonight," she said, and the faintest thing, not quite a smile, but the shape of one, moved across her face. "We've lost enough time." What happened over the following 6 weeks was not a transformation in the dramatic, sudden sense. It was slower and more honest than that, which made it more powerful. Alina resumed her work with Lily, the vibration sessions, the tactile vocabulary, the slow and patient building of a shared language between two people who both understood, for different reasons, how it felt to be unreachable. Lily responded the way a plant responds to being returned to sunlight. Not instantly, but unmistakably, and with a speed that made it clear the growing had never actually stopped, only been interrupted. Arthur came home for dinner every night. This was, for him, a radical act. He sat in on the sessions. At first he only watched, sat in the corner of the basement with his jacket off and his elbows on his knees, trying to understand what he was seeing. Alina showed him the vocabulary she and Lily had developed, the tapped patterns, the pressed palms, the rhythms on different surfaces. She showed him how to sign simply, directly, not the formal system, not yet, but the instinctive private language that she and Lily had built together. She showed him how to place his hand on the piano lid and feel what Lily felt, and he did it. This man who had managed thousands of employees, who had negotiated with governments, who had never once in his professional life been a student. He did it with the focused, humbled attention of someone who finally understood that the most important knowledge he would ever need was not in any quarterly report he had ever read. One evening, sitting on the basement floor with Lily's small hands pressed between his own, feeling the bass note Alina drew slowly from the cello, Arthur felt something pass through him that was not sound. It was pulse. It was presence. It was the simplest possible version of the thing he had been searching for in boardrooms and acquisition targets, and the controlled achievements of an $11 billion empire. The feeling of being connected to something real. He pressed his daughter's hands between his, and he felt her feel the music, and he thought, "This is what I was supposed to be doing all along." The foundation gala was held 6 weeks later. Arthur's foundation, the Sterling Center for Child Development, had been running for 3 years, largely as a tax strategy that had evolved into something he actually believed in. The annual gala was a black tie event. 500 guests, a string quartet, the kind of dinner that cost more per plate than most people earned in a week. Lily had never attended. Arthur had always arranged for her to be managed quietly upstairs, away from the noise and the crowd and the social complexity that could overwhelm her. This year was different. Alina had been working with Lily on a percussion piece for 4 weeks, simple, repetitive, built around a rhythm Lily had invented herself one afternoon on the kitchen counter, and which Alina had formalized into something she could perform. A small drum, a wooden block, her hands, her feet. The piece was 40 seconds long. It was, by any formal musical measure, not complicated. Arthur had never heard anything so brave in his life. He sat in the front row, center seat, in his black tie and his careful boardroom face, and he watched his daughter walk onto the stage. Lily wore a dark blue dress. She was barefoot because barefoot meant she could feel the stage, could feel the vibration of the room, could orient herself in a space full of 500 strangers through her feet and her skin, and the particular quality of air in a room with a high ceiling and full chairs. She carried her drum under her arm. She placed it on the stand Alina had positioned earlier. She pressed her palm to the stage floor once, feeling the room. Then she looked up at the audience. She found her father's face in the front row. He pressed his palm flat against his knee, their signal. The one he had learned 6 weeks ago on a basement floor. The one that meant, "I'm here, I feel it too, I'm not going anywhere." Lily smiled, she played. The 40 seconds that followed were not spectacular in any way that the music critics in the audience could have written about. The rhythm was simple, the execution imperfect, one beat slightly late, one transition a half-second slow. None of that mattered. What the audience felt, what 500 people in black tie and diamonds felt, sitting in the kind of silence that descends on a room when something genuinely true is happening in it, was the specific quality of courage that exists in a person who has decided, after a long time of being told they cannot be reached, to reach anyway. Alina stood at the side of the stage. She did not perform. She simply stood where Lily could see her present, the way she had always been present, not as a solution to a problem but as a person who had decided that this child deserved to be known. When Lily finished, she set her hands in her lap and looked at her father. Arthur was already standing. The rest of the audience followed. Afterward, in the chaos of the reception, a reporter from a tech publication approached Arthur about the merger announcement he had planned to make at the event, the acquisition that was supposed to be the evening's real headline. Arthur looked at the man for a moment as though he'd briefly forgotten what a merger was. Decided to redirect the announcement, Arthur said. The foundation is launching a sensory education initiative, research and practical programs. We're calling it the Vasquez method. Reporter blinked. After, Arthur looked across the room, where Elena was kneeling to help Lily remove the drum from its stand, both of them moving in the unhurried rhythm of people who have learned each other's timing. After its founder, he said. He had learned, in 6 weeks, something it had taken him 44 years to be ready to understand, that the most important things are not transmitted through words or money or the polished confidence of a man who has always been the most certain person in any room. They are transmitted through contact, through presence, through the patient, unglamorous, irreplaceable act of paying attention to someone until they know, in the specific wordless place where a child keeps their most essential self, that they are real to you, that they matter, that you feel what they feel. He excused himself from the reporter and walked across the room slowly, the way a man walks when he is moving toward something he almost lost and is not yet fully accustomed to having again. The crowd parted without noticing him. He had spent his entire adult life being the person a crowd parts for, and for the first time, the feeling of it meant nothing compared to the 11 feet of distance between himself and his daughter. He crossed the room to his daughter. He pressed his palm flat against the stage floor. Lily put her hand over his. Alina put her hand over theirs both. The three of them sat with their hands stacked in the middle of a black tie gala while 500 guests moved around them, and nobody said anything, because there was nothing to say that couldn't be felt. Before you go, if this story moved you, if it made you think about the people in your life you might be failing to really hear, drop a comment below. Tell us, was Arthur wrong to fire Alina? And hit that like button if you want more stories about the connections that change everything. Because sometimes the most profound communication has nothing to do with sound. Sometimes it's just two hands and the willingness to feel.